Hello and welcome back to Reset. I have a special guest with me today. He is one of Australia's favourite dermatologists. His name is Dr Andrew Freeman, and we are going to be diving deep into all things skin health. Andrew, welcome to Reset.
Thanks for having me, Ash. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so good to have you in the studio. Let's start from the beginning though. What is a dermatologist, and when should people come to see a dermatologist instead of their GP or say a beautician or something like that?
Yep. Okay, well, first thing to say is a dermatologist is a specialist medical doctor. So this is someone who's chosen their career to be purely skin. So after you become a doctor here in Australia, then we usually diverge into different types of speciality, cardiology or the heart or bone. And in dermatology, it's all skin. And so that's the skin we think of, but it's also hair and nails and everything related to those conditions. And so when you're picking a dermatologist, you're really going to see someone when you need expert care in that particular field. So in this case, skin. If you're seeing your general practitioner, I think that's an excellent place to start when you need general advice about what's happening, who should I see, how should I get started. And I think then if the simple things aren't working or the initial plan isn't working in whatever field you're trying to improve when it comes to your health, then I think that's when you need to seek the specialist, and in this case, a dermatologist.
Yeah, nice. That sounds like a lot of study. How many years at uni did you spend?
So university is sort of same for all doctors. It's about 5 to 6 years, depending on the program. And then you need to do 2 years of general training in the hospital systems around Australia, and then you can apply to a specialist program. Now, there's at the time that I did mine, about 26 jobs Australia-wide and about 400 to 500 applicants, so it's pretty competitive. Often takes a couple of years to get your foot in the door, and then once you are, then you need to go through a 5-year training program, and at the conclusion of several years, you have these examinations that prove your competence, and if you don't meet them, then you go back and you get the opportunity to do it again, so it can lengthen out quite a bit. So in my case, it was sort of 12 years to go from not a doctor to dermatologist.
Okay, so we have the right person in the room for this.
Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
If you could give, say, 2 pieces of advice to women in their 20s and 30s linked to skin health, what would you tell us?
I think my first answer is going to be a bit obvious, but it just needs to be said, sunscreen. I think it's number 1, number 2, number 3 when it comes to looking after our skin, and sun protection. So if you're not into sunscreen, then you can do it with clothing and other covers, okay? So you don't have to pick that one, but it's protecting yourself here in Queensland especially, and Gold Coast even more so from that UV radiation. And my second bit of advice is listen to your skin and not marketing. So when we're talking about skin health, we're often looking at our bodies and correcting something that's there. And so if it's not there, then you probably don't need X, Y, or Z. But if you're noticing redness or you're noticing pigmentation or you're noticing fine lines, okay, then there is something to correct or improve or to stimulate your body to do better. Because unfortunately, we don't have the fountain of youth yet. And so we need to put these practices into place only when they're going to be of most utility.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess also embracing who you are and the skin
100%,
you're in is totally fine as well.
Absolutely.
I think,
We're told that things are, abnormal to have X, Y, or Z. And I always tell people that the secret to perfection is imperfection. You need to have something that makes you human. You need to have a feature that makes you uniquely you. So you don't want to be totally airbrushed. We've seen celebrities, who have these photo shoots, and you look at them and they go, yeah, they're pretty, they're handsome, but looks a bit weird. You've got to have something that makes you feel more authentic. So correcting a problem 99% of the way is often a smarter move.
Yeah, and I always find it really refreshing when you see those pictures of celebrities completely without makeup, without the lighting, without the styling, 100%. And you're like, oh, they just look like me on a Sunday morning. Like, this is okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that also then makes the choice of what you want to do about what's bothering you in your skin a lot easier, because you can see that we can improve at a realistic amount and we don't have to be 100% perfect, because getting the 100% perfect comes with additional risks, costs, time, and I don't think it's healthy for us to push so hard for that, absolute flawless all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, we all know these people that look as flawless as possible on the outside, but it's really like their personality and what's on the inside that just shines through.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
But the only thing I will say to that is that having outward confidence can also be key. So I do see that there are people who I would classify what I'm seeing on the skin as a minor concern, but it concerns them so much that once it's corrected, obviously safely, then they're just a much more confident person. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, you know.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
That's so true. It must be really rewarding, the work that you do.
Oh yeah, no, skin's very, very rewarding in that way.
There's a video on your website and you say on there a line that I was like, initially when I saw it, I thought, oof. You say that your favourite skin condition to treat is cancer.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that and why.
Yeah. So it sounds bad, but I feel like when you are dealing with skin cancers in particular, the number one thing is early detection, and an early detection, it leads to a much better outcome. So when I'm seeing someone for their skin cancer checks, then often you can pick it up at such an early stage that they don't need the surgeries, they don't need the extensive treatments, they don't need the corrective, lasers or operations or medications. You can catch it at such a stage that they can continue to live a normal life, and that's extremely rewarding. And equally, there is sometimes when there's a problem that's so difficult or big, like the big scary word cancer, that there are some people who put their head in the sand for a little while because they're afraid of what that will mean. And when you're able to walk them through that journey and go, okay, yeah, this is a problem, but it's all manageable. We can fix it. This is what you'll look like. This is what that process will be. Then just seeing that relief in their eyes, that's really rewarding. And then there's also that you're doing good. All of us got into medicine to do good. And I think can't really do any better good than fix cancer.
Yeah. And Australia often gets the not so glamorous title of skin cancer capital of the world. What are the stats around that?
So stats are terrifying, unfortunately.
Brace yourselves, guys.
Yeah, so it's essentially 2 in 3 people will be touched by skin cancer in their lifetime. Okay, so that's almost everyone. And then it's a 1 in 40 to 1 in 45 chance of having melanoma, which, as we know, is one of our most deadly cancers. And back to my earlier point, that we know that virtually all of these are preventable in some way if we're better with our sun protection. But perspective is something we gain as we get a little bit older, and you have to put in the hard yards day in and day out in order to get that outcome. At the moment, we're fighting against so many mixed messages about what we should be doing about our skin. There's fear about sunscreen, there's fear about missing out on vitamin D, there's fear about chemicals, there's all these food-related issues, and so we don't know who to trust, what we should do, where the balance is. And I feel like the sun protection issue has gotten so muddled that people don't really trust that message anymore. And I want to be our mission, hopefully with your help, that we can start to instill that back into people, because that's going to be the biggest dividend.
So let's dive into it a little bit then.
Yeah.
I hear that the first 7 years of your life is so foundational as to your skin health. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. So let's talk about how we make new cells in our body.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. So let's say that you're a brand new baby. You make 1 in a billion errors in DNA replication. Obviously, these are round numbers. And it takes 6 billion replications of DNA to create a new cell. So you've been born and you're making 6 errors already. And your body's like, okay, delete, 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 delete. But if you get a sunburn, for example, then that mutation rate jumps, and it can jump 1,000-fold. And you don't have a reserve of stem cells that never age. The next generation of cells is responsible for making that next generation, and so on and so forth. So we develop these islands on our body. We call them clonal abnormalities. So there are these little groups of abnormal cells that continually make more and more abnormalities. And it's terrifying when you think about it, but technically on our body, we probably have cancer cells in the tens of thousands at any one time. And your body is really good at removing those. But if you start with a heavy base of damage, aka you don't look after yourself when you're a kid, you get burnt, you have a lot of other environmental exposures like, cigarettes, other carcinogens, environmental pollutants, then by the time you come to be an adult and you go, okay, well, I want to prioritize these things, you're already working against so many clones of abnormality that the amount of work your body has to deal with and the amount of help it will need will be so much more, which sounds terrifying. But it's never too late to start. So as little as 3 weeks of being fantastic with your sun exposure, for example, can drop those clonal abnormalities astoundingly.
Amazing.
Right? So
at any age?
At any age.
Okay.
At any age, right? Now, you're still going to be battling against the mutation rate and then obviously the proliferation rate in the skin, so how many more cells come. But it is always a good idea to start, right? And then we can go from there. So just because you had, not the best protection in the childhood, then, you don't have to give up on the body later in life.
Yeah.
But I do think that as we spoke about earlier, there's no fountain of youth. So you can't live your life in a test tube or in a coddled environment. You need to have some fun.
Yeah.
And it's about striking that balance about what it is that you want to be dealing with down the track and making that conscious effort. And that's where I think Gen Z's probably got their head on straight, because they are looking about these longevity ideas, and health for them in the future is going to be really important. And they're coming up with, 5-year, 10-year plans, sometimes even 20-year plans of what that might look like to the best of their ability.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And then I know on my weather app, I can kind of see UV ratings and stuff. And at the moment, I think it's okay to be outside till around 8:30 in the morning or something, and then go back out at 3. Yeah. How accurate is that?
Look, it's pretty accurate. I would akin it to, when you get the weather prediction saying that, hey, look, it's going to rain, and then you walk outside and it's not raining. So it's as accurate as it can be, because it purely relies on cloud movement, et cetera. But it's a pretty good indicator that the UV index is when you should be listening to it, or where you shouldn't be listening to it. And there might be give or take an hour. So, for example, anything below a UV index of 3 is pretty safe. Anything above a UV index of 3 is going to be, more problematic. Yep. And the more it gets to the range of extreme, which is 11 plus, that's my God, what are you doing? Get
out of the sun,
now, the flip side of that, though, is that to produce vitamin D in your skin, then you want the UV index to be above 3. Right?
Okay.
So I have this analogy of toast. You want to be like a piece of toast, and, a little bit on one side and a little bit on the other side. And the larger surface area you're exposed, the shorter the time in the sun that you need to get the vitamin D.
Okay.
So the statistics work out at about 17% surface area, which is like a chest or a back for 5 minutes, sort of 3 times a week. And we were designed to not have exposure constantly and be able to store it in our fat. So in summer, when you're outside a little bit more, then you can actually put reserves that will take you pretty much right through the winter. It doesn't have to be constant.
Okay.
And if you're someone who has had a diagnosis of melanoma, for example, or skin cancer, then these groups are actually at risk of vitamin D deficiency because they're so afraid of further sun exposure. So the first 6 to 12 months are, we get those habits, and then we go, okay, now we need to wind them back to make sure you're going to be healthy long term, because low vitamin D increases your rate of melanoma, right? So, but if you are afraid, you can supplement. Through the diet. There's all sorts of apps that you can get that help you measure how much vitamin D you should be getting as an intake. But, simple things like, those little white button mushrooms, right? If you put them into the sun, they'll absorb the vitamin D for you, so you can cook it into your food and get your natural vitamin D. So it doesn't have to be, via dairy if you're someone who is vegan or vegetarian or just doesn't like animal products, for example. Yeah.
Oh, okay. We're learning so much. I feel like everyone's taking notes right now. On vitamin D supplements, when I was living in London, I feel like almost every second person I knew was taking them throughout winter. And like you said, vitamin D is important. If someone's looking for a good vitamin D supplement and is happy to take it in that form, is there any that you'd recommend, or how do we choose one?
It's a difficult question to answer, because I always have this theory that the best one is the one that you're willing to take. So I'd say accessibility, right? Taste and repeatability is the most important things. And most supplements are regulated when they make health claims, like vitamin D. So if it's sold in Australia, for example, I won't have much concern that it's actually giving you the international units that you desire. Okay. But I would always make sure that it's manufactured and sold kind of onshore. I think is probably a good way to go about it. Yeah. And then you can overdose on vitamin D.
Okay. So what happens if you overdose
on vitamin D? So if you overdose on vitamin D, then you're going to be leaching calcium out the other way. So you're going to be sort of stripping it from other areas that are, supposed to be storing more
Yep.
important minerals because your body's trying to flush this excess away. But, you have to be working pretty hard at that, I would say. But it does happen.
It does happen, yeah. Okay. And then sunscreen.
Yes.
Not all sunscreens are created equal.
Correct. Yeah.
What should we be looking for a good quality sunscreen?
Yeah. Not to be a broken record, but one that you'll put on, right? That is the number one thing. So the market has completely dictated where the industry has gone, right? We like things that feel nice, that smell nice, that aren't sticky, that, look matte, can sit under makeup.
Yeah.
All these sort of things are important. And when you make those choices, you can say one thing, but your wallet is really, what the industry relies on, then you're going to make some compromises. So we want the SPF, which, remember, is just a multiple. It's a sun protection factor. It means that if you go into the sun and let's say you have SPF of 1, well, you'll burn, in 1 minute, for example.
Okay.
Now, an SPF of 5 means that it then takes 5 minutes for you to burn because 5 times whatever that length is. But often for people who are exposed to that particular type of radiation they do these tests with, they can burn as little as 10 seconds. So an SPF of 50 plus doesn't give you hours and hours and hours of protection. And also, SPFs are measured in labs, not in people, not with heat, not with sweating, not with wiping it, not being like, I just put a little bit there because I don't want it to look white or messy. And so that's why we advocate for SPF 50, because the higher the protection, theoretically, by the time you put it on, by the time you miss some areas, you may be getting anywhere from SPF 12 to SPF 25 on the skin. And that sounds bad, but it's still blocking out 93% of the UV radiation. So then the most important thing is reapplication. And I say height of summer or you're outdoors, you're active, every 40 minutes is when you need to be reapplying it. And if you go, okay, it's something I need to put on, it's, again, sold and TGA approved in Australia as the highest SPF that I want to put on and I'm reapplying it every 40 minutes, you're nailing it. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of talk about different chemicals in products and things like that. Are there any chemicals that are used in sunscreens in Australia that we should be reading labels and just flat out avoiding?
It's a controversial thing because the studies that you're referring to, where we're worried about some of the hormonal changes that come from sunscreens. Again, they weren't done in people. They were done in animal models. They were done in, one particular lab that's done a series of these at a very high concentrations of particular UVA blockers. They tested, 6 particular ingredients. And America and Australia are a little bit different in that their regulatory approval of different sunscreens is classified differently. And so these chemicals haven't changed in the US since the 90s because it's really hard to get new sunscreens to be approved. So these sunscreens that were tested in these studies, they're usually not in the main mixtures, in modern sunscreens. So, and even then, let's say even if those studies were true, that this is a maybe of having these problems versus the known certainty of not using the sunscreen. But, if you really wanted to avoid all chemicals and you were really worried about this, then it leaves you with your mineral sunscreens, okay? So your zincs, your titanium, other physical blockers that sort of reflect sun. But even then, there is a chemical reaction that happens with the zinc and with your skin. So you're still getting some reaction in the skin, but you're not going to have those same, endocrine concerns that came out in these studies. And again, I want to clarify, this was in animal models, in mice and rats in particular, and not in people, and at extremely high doses. But you can do those things to avoid any chemical that you like. The trade-off is the thickness, okay? So now how to get a mineral sunscreen to provide that reflection, then it needs to usually be quite thick. And also, they're very fragile. So it needs to be protected in certain packaging, needs to be handled certain ways, transported certain ways. And if it's not, then it can break down. So if you are taking it out of its packaging, you're squeezing out a little bit to use on the beach, then that's when you're going to run into trouble with those physical sunscreens because they're not as stable. Yeah.
Okay. We've talked a lot about external appearance.
Yes.
But what role does nutrition play?
Yes.
Tell me, are there some foods we should be eating, we should be avoiding? I'm sure it's unique to individuals, but is there kind of like some blanket rules that you would recommend?
So There are, and I think we all know them, right? We just don't want to verbalize them because they're delicious, right? But any processed, high sugary foods really aren't great for our skin. And they were designed as treats. They just become more mainstream.
Yep.
And we've gone away from cooking fresh fruits and vegetables. And, one of the most interesting longevity studies that's been done is that it turns out gardeners live longer than lots of people.
Ooh.
Yeah. Now, for two reasons, right? The first reason is obviously there's exercise involved. Second reason is most of them grow their own fresh fruit and vegetables. And just because you grow it doesn't necessarily mean that's health related. But when you grow something, you invest time and energy and you're more likely to eat that thing. And if you've ever tried your hand at farming, it's not that easy, right, to do. So you're often growing your high turnover leafy vegetables. And the role of, leafy vegetables in our diets is that it takes all the minerals from the soil and from the atmosphere and from these complex chemical reactions, and it stores it in the plant. And then we eat that and we consume these basic minerals. And that's why supplements were invented, because our diets got worse and worse and worse. And we became deficient in all these things. And we went, don't have time to do that. I'd rather microwave and take X, Y, or Z, but it's not always absorbed as well, in non-organic matter, whether that's animal protein or whether that's vegetables. And so I think that it's incredibly important to learn cooking, as a basic skill that we're all busy and it's hard. But if you learn basic cooking, then you'll go, oh my God, what have I been eating for the last, 10 or 15 years? Because I can make it so much nicer. It helps your hip pocket, right? Because it's cheaper, fresh fruit and vegetables. But actually, then you'll have better nutrition for your body. But even in that circumstance, there will be cases where you are going to be low in X, Y, or Z. And that's where your general practitioner and then, emerging companies that are able to do, testing for you remotely come in, because you can go, okay, well, I'm doing all the right things, but I'm still feeling tired or lethargic or other things. Am I actually deficient in something? And you can create a supplementation plan specifically to go after that, either with supplements or with food. And food's always going to be my preference. And, we're always taught the gut's super important, right, for your skin. And so that's 100% true, right?
Okay.
We inflame our gut. We're going to have inflamed skin. It doesn't matter if that's an autoimmune condition like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, or it's just, irritable bowel syndrome or lactose intolerance, gluten intolerance, celiac disease. But it actually goes the other way too, right? So if you're not looking after your skin, your epigenetics will release inflammatory cytokines that can influence your microbiome in the gut the other way around, right? And we're only just starting with the tip of the understanding of realizing that, the skin's the largest organ, which, is always a tagline, but actually is an organ and has far more influence over our bodies than maybe we've ever given credit for.
Yeah, amazing.
And, so I think that going forward, environmental management, pollution, et cetera, is going to be super important.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's really fascinating. If you were to give me a shopping list of, Ash, here's a few fruits and veggies you should definitely be consuming if you want glowy skin, what am I buying?
Okay, all right. It's controversial. Red meat, I think, is really important because low iron leads to so many different problems. And then I would go spinach, right? Because spinach can be cooked up in so many different ways. It's really high and really nutrient dense. Kale, yes, but not everyone likes the kale. It's not as accessible. It's a little bit more expensive. So I think if you included those two things as your foundation, then you're always going to be on a right track, right? And then you want other essential legumes that can kind of help you out. So things like eggplant, for example, quite helpful. Citrus fruits are quite helpful as well with their vitamin C and ascorbic acid. But when you consume those, you're better off to do it in the evening, for example, because they contain things like sorolins that make you a bit more sun sensitive, which goes against the vitamin C juice in the morning type thing. And then obviously you've got fructose in fruits. So, you've got to be careful not to overdo the sugars. And then probably one of my favorite overlooked foods is beans.
Okay.
I think it's a great source of protein.
Like a green bean.
Oh, well, so almost like those three beans, that you get, just the standard ones.
Yep.
I think they've got good protein in it. They've got good nutrition in it. They're packed with iron. They can also have some calcium in it, zinc in it. So it's a good way to consume things. It's cheap. It's available. Mushrooms for the reasons that I talked about before with the vitamin D and the supplementation. And if you're not lactose intolerant, then adding in some, dairy products. I go with Scary Milk.
Scary milk,
the full cream.
OG, full cream, cow's milk. Yeah, okay.
Because, the fat in the milk will help you buffer against the lactose a little bit, so you get less gut irritation for it. You balance that against the calories, and it's not something you're having all the time. But I think it's a really good supplement, I think that if you are going to be avoiding things.
That was going to be my next question,
because this is always a difficult conversation to have. The groups that we know that have the highest yield impact on our diet are always going to be lactose and gluten, right? And then you've got like nightshade family plants and products. Can
you give some examples?
Like sweet potato, for examples, in that group.
Yeah.
And those broad categories of foods often trigger the most amount of inflammation in our gut if you're sensitive to it. So it's only an if you're sensitive to it. However, if you cut out all gluten and all lactose and all nightshade families, right, then you are going to have a very limited diet.
Yep.
And so then you got to go, okay, well, am I getting enough nutrition? Because your skin is also, from the body's point of view, one of the least important organs. So it is the sacrificial lamb. That's why it's our armor on the outside. So if you're nutritionally deficient, it will present with rashes. It will present with hair loss or fingernail issues or sensitivity or all these other sort of things. So yes, avoiding these ingredients is important for best optimal gut health, but so long as it's not at the sacrifice of nutrition, calories, iron, all these other sort of essential building blocks that we need.
Yeah. What impact does stress have on our skin?
Yeah, massive. So stress is a hormone, right? So it's a hormonal release in our body that allows us to deal with circumstances and go above and beyond what the normal baseline function of our bodies is. And so when you're producing these stress hormones, then it's going to proliferate. Your immune system's going to go on crazy, oil glands are going to go crazy, angiogenesis is going to go crazy, which is blood vessel formation, and all these things present in certain conditions like rosacea and acne, pro-inflammatory conditions like psoriasis and eczema. All of these things will go crazy the more stressed that we are, because it was designed for a short period, fight or flight. But the way that we're living our lives at the moment is so fast-paced that the levels of baseline stress in everyone is crazy high. And when I'm going through my acne with my younger demographic, usually my teenage patients, and I'm explaining to them and their parents about this analogy, I said, well, look, if you and I, meaning me and the parent, went back to being 16 years old and we wrote down everything we did in a day, and then we compare it to everything that their child is doing in a day, our list will be half, maybe a third of the things that these younger people are doing day in and day out, because there's no shut-off anymore, right? You're available 24/7 on your tablets. You're engaged 24/7. The world expects you to respond to an email or a phone call, and that base level of stress amplifies anything else that happens. So let's say that, your genetics are like a lottery ticket. And if your lotto numbers come up, a single rice tips the scale, that final number. But the stress acts like giving you, a power hit. So you guarantee, 4 or 5 year numbers are already primed. It takes very little then to stimulate your genetics to present earlier or more severe forms of whatever it is. And in my world, obviously, skin diseases.
Yeah. Are you seeing an increase then?
Massive increase. I have a joke, right, that the most powerful drug in the world that I'll be able to prescribe one day will be a holiday. Because you see it all the time. Someone will come in and they go, oh, look, mate, skin condition is terrible, but, when I go off to Japan, it all just goes away. And they're going, it's got to be the Japanese food, the Japanese weather, the Japanese this. And I go, well, let's just go one through. What were you doing over there? Oh, I was on holidays, I was skiing, I was doing this. And you go, well, I think that's it. It's the shutdown, really, that makes the biggest difference. Obviously there are some things in that environment as well, and I don't know what the solution is, because I don't think there is one, to allow us to reduce down our cortisol levels. I don't have the answer there, but I think as we get smarter and with the help of artificial intelligence to really study our genetics better and these hormone signaling pathways, which are incredibly complex, maybe we'll map it.
Yeah. I know when people come on the retreats that we host here at Reset, they'll say their guts feel better, like all these things, and it's all linked to stress and environment, and just hitting that pause button, that intentional pause, the flow-on effects are huge.
Massive.
Yeah.
And, if you interview a lot of successful people, you hear these successful people who have pushed really, really hard to get to these areas. And then when they finally sell out or divest and then the pace just slows down, they become the biggest advocates for, balance and don't do this and don't do that, because, it really does make such an impact. And when you stop, you finally see it.
Yeah. It's such a tricky one though, because I think in hindsight, they all also know that they wouldn't have got to where they were, and like it drives them as a person and a human. So it's just, we're so complex as people, like what we want, what we need, Yeah. You have your own skincare brand.
Yes.
Bloc.
Yes.
I know that you've recently rebranded.
Yes.
They're looking beautiful. I actually have one here. I'm going to show it on camera.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, look. I'm going to show you guys. It's so pretty. But tell me, besides being obviously created and approved by dermatologists, which I love, it gives me a lot of confidence. Like there are so many products out there on the market that I find it quite overwhelming. You need to almost become a specialist to read the ingredients 100%. And be like, do I want this on my skin? Just because they have a lot of Instagram followers doesn't necessarily mean it's good for me. But what makes Bloc special?
The obvious thing is it's formulated by us and it's clinic proven. So what we mean by that is that we have seen over 15, 20, 35 years of collective knowledge of what works, what doesn't work, every whinging complaint about every trend that's come through. And we've distilled that down into go, okay, well, these may not be the tip of the spear like the ingredient that was invented yesterday, but they have been proven, they work, and they're simple. We don't market heavily, via Instagram or via influencers, because we think that the retention rate speaks for itself. It's over 70% of people who pick it up continue to buy the product.
Sorry, wait, 70% retention?
Yeah.
I think any brand listening is like, give me that. Okay, that's huge.
So it's massive. Thank you. And it's always been an in-clinic thing for us. We currently service around about 24,000 people a year, thereabouts, and it's always been kind of enough for us. But in the new generation of Bloc, we wanted to export that, because when we started in the skincare journey, it was not a very crowded space. And it's become, as you say, an incredibly crowded space with
confusing space as well.
Confusing space with things that don't work. Brands will pop up, they'll pop down, they'll be trendy. And the idea behind Bloc was it's supposed to be a standard. So if you use it as a benchmark, then you can compare it to anything else that you have, And if you use the product and it works, that is going to be the maximum efficacy that you can get out of an over-the-counter product in that category. Now, there's individualization that comes into that, right? You might not like the scents that we've picked. You might not like the feel of it, but that that's the result you should get. So whatever you pick up after that, it must match it, right? And if it doesn't match it, then it's not on par. And that's where it's gotten to. Yeah,
I love that. And then what kind of products do you have in the range?
So in the range we're starting with, in our new relaunch, we're going on with our pro ceramides, we're going on with our moisturizing range, we're going over our antioxidants, our vitamin C's, obviously, we're going with our niacinamides. We're also going with a broader range of cleansers, because it started out as, primarily acne focused, and so we're going sort of more for everyone now. And then coming in the future will be a couple of additional ones that I can't speak about. But we wanted to get the basics down. So our basic concerns are usually hydration, wrinkles, pigmentation, and redness. Okay, so there is one product in every different category that will tackle that. And then there is a second product that will go across two of those. So if you go, look, I've got both concerns and I really don't want to spend the money buying two different products. I know that I'll accept 80% of it, but it will do two in one. Well, then we've got you. Because these are formulated to a really, really high end, but we are aware that you can't make a product for everyone. And so we don't want to lose the quality by competing on the lowest price. Equally, we don't think you need to gouge someone for it. So it's I call it a BMW or Mercedes, right? It's not a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari, but it's a really nice luxury product that you can afford.
Yeah, gorgeous. And is it for males and females?
Males and females, yeah. So that's the big change I've seen in skincare is that men are starting to pick up the products because it was uncool or unmasculine to pick up products. And the only thing that I think is different is in the how you use it. So you might use it more or less frequently. And then different genders have different desires of how they want products to feel or smell.
Okay.
So we've tried to make it as unisex as possible, the happy medium between the two. But as our patients and as our clients come back to us, then I do see in the future that we'll start to have more tailored approaches, more about the feel and look, not necessarily about the ingredients, right? Because compliance is the number one thing. So we're looking for that feedback and go, okay, what makes you not use this as much as you should be using it? And then we reiterate. So we're always reiterating based on that one principle of repeatability, right? Usability, because we know the results are there, right?
Yeah, I love that. And I know that for me, like whenever I buy any skincare products, it will be in the bathroom and my partner Alex will just end up using whatever I have anyway. So this is great.
It is. That's it. That's the exact thing.
Yeah.
You know, we wanted you to be able to pick it up and just use it. And, you know, you can see, for example, you know, we have heavy moisturizer and we have, you know, Pro B. So the labeling is very clear as what's inside. And then there's a link back to the website, how to use and what to expect. So if you do pick it up, you can screenshot it, you can Google it, and you know exactly what's in there.
Yeah.
So we wanted to keep that simplicity.
Yeah, really refreshing because like we said, we live in a very complex world. Like let's make these things as easy as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I know because I follow you on Instagram,
Yes.
that you're often at these really innovative like medical conferences and things. Tell me, what is the future of skincare? What are you excited about? What's coming?
So I think the number one thing that's going to be coming is going to be tailored diagnosis. Okay, so AI-powered tools that allow you to analyze your own skin and get that information, you know, at a dermatologist level on your phone.
Yeah, very cool.
Thing I would say about that we're not so great at doing is capturing the images required at home. You know, we have a lot of patients who will say, look, if you're having this problem, send us through a photo. And it's really wild, the amount and degree of the quality of that photograph. So we need to work on the technologies that allow us to capture that. And so I see that maybe for the next 5 to 10 years, that's still going to be an in-clinic experience or, you know, an in wherever it is experience. But then after that, as the phone technologies and standardization of photography or even, you know, AI computing can go, okay, well, you've kind of half taken a photo of your face. I'll build out the rest of the pixels to go, okay, this is how we do the analysis.
Yeah.
Then I think that's going to be the biggest thing because that should provide you with the best information. But it is also going to be a trust exercise.
Yeah.
You know, there's no secret they'll be used for marketing, you know, those sort of things. So you want to have some sort of authority looking over this and almost give these apps or applications an APRA registration or a qualification that says they're allowed to do that so that holds them to a minimum standard.
Yep.
But it's exciting because we all want more information at our fingertips and we want it to be proven and checked. And then the second thing that will happen is we were speaking earlier before about before this podcast started about genetics, okay, and being able to analyze our DNA to tell us what we should be eating, what's going to cause us problems and how we might be able to correct that in the future. So understanding that epigenetic level. The hard part would be listening to it. Because something that will affect you in 30 or 40 years, maybe you don't want to put in the effort.
Yep.
And then not necessarily in skincare initially, because it will need to have the kinks work out, but working on what we call immunotherapy. So triggering our own body's healing mechanisms, our own body's attack mechanisms to better heal yourself or even create new stem cells, I see is going to be the future, the focus. But at the moment, it's a little bit primitive because it can equally fix your skin cancer but attack your lungs. So, so it's not quite safe.
We need a multidisciplinary approach here.
But that will be good because we're just hijacking the most powerful machine in the world currently, our bodies, to do better. And then there'll be a trickle-down effect from these more hardcore medications, ones that are considered safe to put on the skin to signal our intercellular pathways to do it, but with a cream, right? Not having to have an infusion or to take a tablet, and then you're kind of in control. And in particular, because I like skin cancer, is that we'll have that same ability to put creams on that feel like moisturizers that will clear the field of the abnormality for a much longer period of time than the basic chemotherapies that we have now.
Amazing. So a really exciting, innovative future coming, and it'll be here before we know it.
Yeah. And this is going to sound terrible as well, but there's never been a better time to get sick, arguably. We know so much more.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those believers, and I think that the person who lives for forever has already been born. So I think that we're going to move so quickly in this space, it's going to make our head spin.
Yep.
But it comes with all the incredible possibilities of Fountain of Youth.
Yeah. And you and your team are building a pretty epic new headquarters.
Yes. Yep.
What sorts of things can we expect to see there?
So it's our health precinct. So it's our idea of what health looks like in the future.
Yeah.
And it'll be a tech-enabled, AI-enabled building that allow us to move into that diagnostic space, not just for skin, but hopefully lots of other conditions at the same time. But then going back to, okay, well, how do you engage someone when there's so much distrust? So it's about building a community around that precinct and involving other practitioners, other allied health, where we can build a health-conscious community, engage them, not just in the not fun things, but also the fun things, teach them about their bodies, their skin, what to expect, how to manage it, and then enable the choice to act on those things if they want.
And I think that's a really beautiful hybrid, because in this world of AI and tech, I think we're also craving human connection more than ever. So to be able to fuse those two worlds together is really special.
Yeah, it's a terrifyingly exciting future, because I think we're all worried about where technology will replace us and where our role fits into that. But I'm a very optimistic view. I think that the entirety of our being will go down to this, being able to slow down, look someone in the eyes, let the technology do all the difficult things in the background, and just hold someone's hand and say, it's okay.
Yeah.
And then also, this is your journey. What do you want to do? There's no limits anymore about how long you can live, how you can live, how healthy you'll be. Yeah, it's bright.
I can feel your energy
I'm buzzing
let's
over it.
do this. No, that's so good. Tell me, is this true?
Yes.
Are we already living in the future with this aspect? Are there some scanning machines for skin cancers that already exist and can kind of map on a regular basis what's happening there? Do they work?
So there are. So there are. There's two things that we need to understand. There's the health aspect and there's the economic aspect as well.
Okay.
So these machines do exist, and they're great technology, but they're super expensive.
Okay.
And at the moment, we still need to prove that the results are reliable enough to let them, wild and free.
Right.
So they are mostly in the research phase, but our belief is that that's the way that we should be moving towards that technology.
Yeah.
There is also the functionality. Let's say that all skin checks, around Australia move to these models. Well, you can have a machine, but it can only really look at someone every 15 to 20 minutes because you still need to get undressed or dressed. There's still not a great way to undress someone without taking off their clothes.
Yeah.
You have to bring them into the room. You have to explain how to stand. And at the moment, it needs to be very static. So if you've ever had an MRI or an X-ray, it's like, hold still. And so the machine then needs to stitch all these images together.
Okay.
And then it needs to process that. It needs to go back to a data bank that it has. And what we're seeing at the moment is that a lot of these data sets are very, very biased. So it's good at picking up something in an artificial database, but in the real world, sometimes it's missing a few things.
Okay.
And then we need to work on special areas like, hands and feet and scalp. How do we quickly look at those areas which we have to move stuff out of the way? The machines can't currently do that.
Yeah.
The other part about it is that it relies on 2 images taken at once to get a really quick idea. So there's this distance, right? But in dermatology, we often rely on something called dermoscopy, which is using a little tiny magnifying device that's put exactly on the skin to detect special patterns. At the moment, it's quite laborious to go, everyone needs to be mapped with this extra device because it physically has to be put onto the skin. But if we can work out either a quick way for the machine to identify which one should or shouldn't have this, or a imaging device that allows us to take that level of photograph from the very beginning, then that's when the leap will come and with mass adoption. But at the moment, it's still going to be much more economic for someone to get a skin check with their dermatologist or their skincare provider, because you don't have to rely on the $1 million of machinery in order to make that happen. And so our hope is that some of the technologies that we're working on will bring down the cost of these $1 million machines to $35,000 or $60,000, which then becomes something that you can scale. And we did this math. I think we need about 2,500 to 2,800 of these machines Australia-wide in order to see everybody.
Yeah, because how frequently should we be doing skin checks?
That's another question. Yeah. So we want to see someone's skin as often as it takes to detect early changes and prevent really serious outcomes. And what I mean by that is that, let's say melanoma, for example, can mutate at the rate of or grow at the rate of 1 millimeter every 6 months. And melanoma is dangerous not when it's wider, but when it's deeper. And so if you didn't have it today and tomorrow it started, if I saw you in 6 months, then it's going to be less than 1 millimeter in thickness, which arguably should be still quite safe to treat. So if there's a risk of melanoma, we want to be seeing someone, at least every 6 months, right? But with other skin cancers, then most of them are not deadly in their early stages, okay? And they can grow for a little while quite safely. Yes, they need to be attended to, but if you didn't pick it up for 2 months or 3 months or even 6 months in circumstances, the outcome will still be the same. There might be a slightly different cosmetic outcome, but the outcome in terms of, you living and your morbidity, mortality, that's exactly the same. So we say annual to scoop up 2 or 3 things, but you can be checked as often as you like, depending on how quickly you want to pick up something. But if you're seeing a human, you don't want to see someone too frequently because our eyes need to see changes over a longer period of time to really pick up that. So unless it's a very bad melanoma, which, would be every 3 to 4 months, I'd say most people, the 6 months would be the earliest intervention that you should pick. And 12 months is a really good time frame for most practitioners. And so this is when the machines will be better than us when they come in because they'll pick up even earlier details, right? Maybe not as subtle, but they'll pick up the earlier changes. Now, the only other thing that I would say about that is that it doesn't matter who you saw. It could be me, it could be God themselves. But if you notice anything on your own body, whether it's a week, a day, a month, you always go back and get it checked out, right?
So what are we looking for in that situation?
Yeah. So you're looking for something that is what we call the ugly duckling sign, something that your gut instinct says, this is not right for me, because gut instinct is pattern recognition we can't verbalize, right? So that's what it is. So your body is recognizing there's a change here, always listen to it. Then there are the obvious things that if you're trying to measure, I've got 1 million moles, what mole looks a bit weirder than another?
Yeah.
More than 2 colors, growing in one direction, sudden changes, persistent symptoms. So that can be persistent itch, persistent pain, anything that bleeds. And when it comes to our keratinocyte cancers, so this is
What is that?
squamous cell carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma. These are skin cancers of the higher layer of the skin. So I should say that all skin cancers are named after the layer of the skin that they grow from.
Ooh.
Yeah. So you've got squamous, which is the highest, most layer of the skin. Then you have basal, which is a little bit lower. Then you have melanoma or melanocytes, a little bit lower than that. And then you have rarer things like Merkel cell carcinoma, which doesn't get a big shout out, but is one of our most deadly forms of skin cancers.
Okay.
And so rapid growth is something to look out for. And then if it bleeds in the rest of the skin cancer categories, it's really, really important. Anything that is painful, right? You want to get checked out. And so the good news about basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma, which is our 2 most common skin cancers here in Australia, then you at some point you're going to notice it. Right.
Okay.
So, and unless it's squamous, basal is locally destructive. So it eats and it eats and it eats. And then on faces, or delicate areas, we're a lot more gung-ho about managing it because we know the consequence of eating, into the eye or into the nose or into the lip. But the reality is if it was on a shoulder and it was taking a while to grow, then the real consequence is just cosmetic lines.
Okay.
After that, you're not going to lose important structures. So if you can't get in for a skin check because you live too far away and you don't feel like you're going to be punished, for having left it a couple of months. But if it's got a brown color to it, and it's rapidly growing, that I'd always just put panic stations on that, because you're more likely to have a melanoma with those sort of features. And I've seen it before where people have said, hey, look, it's a basal cell carcinoma, don't worry about it. And then you get them in, you go, actually, this is not, it's probably a melanoma. So, the caveat to what I said is that, anything can look like anything. And so always get it checked out. But if you've been told you have a basal cell carcinoma, you do have time to look after it. You don't have to tip your world upside down tomorrow.
Yep.
Earlier means smaller, but still good outcome.
Okay.
And with squamous cell carcinoma, that's generally the same. However, there are some danger sites with a squamous cell carcinoma, like noses, lips, eyelids, ears, where it has metastatic potential. And this means that it goes from where it is to all around the body, and it can be sort of deadly. So if you have a cancer, I will say all cancers in those areas, get them looked at ASAP. And then if it's anywhere else on the body and you're not worried about a melanoma, then you have a little bit more time, but you don't know what you're looking at. And so if you're sitting there at home going, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a skin cancer, don't sit on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if your appointment for a skin check was a month away, I don't think that'll make a difference, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And it can take a while. I know dermatologists are in high demand in Australia, so it can take a while to get into a dermatologist, but going to see a GP as a first protocol
100%,
if you're worried.
And this is why I think that a collaborative approach in medicine is so important, because there are not enough specialists until we create them with artificial intelligence to go around.
Yeah.
And so we need generalists who have an interest in skin in order to fill that gap and void, because you practice your best medicine when you love something, right?
That's true.
And so when you find a general practitioner that has a real interest in skin, then it's a really good place to start. And I think they're always going to have your best interest in mind. And so when they see someone who's complex or difficult, or they know the aesthetic outcome could be better doing it another way, then they're going to send you to the specialists. And we have good relationships with our general practitioners. And if they're ever worried or concerned or they think you need that care, then that's when they'll refer on.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
If someone is at the Gold Coast, obviously they can click the links that we're going to put in the show notes and come and see you.
Yep.
If they're somewhere else in Australia and can't travel to the Gold Coast, what's the best way to find a dermatologist in their area that they can trust?
So if you go on to the Australasian College of Dermatology's website, it gives you a list of all the practitioners and where they're practicing. But the reality is most of us Google. And if you Google dermatologist, wherever you are, then the nearest one will pop up. But I would say the best way to go about it is to go to that general practitioner, that GP in your area that has, your trust for other health concerns, and ask them, right? Where are your relationships? Who do you send to? Who can I get in to see if you do have those concerns? And they might go, look, mate, you're low risk. Let's do your skin check now. I don't think you need one, but if we see anything that's worrying or concerning, then we'll refer on. And that will make it a lot more streamlined. So I'd say start there.
Start there, yeah. Yeah, great. Andrew, this conversation has been fascinating. I think everyone has learnt a lot. I will link in the show notes to Bloc Skincare, to the Skin Centre, to you, all the good stuff. But is there anything we haven't spoken about that you wish more people knew?
Well, my final message is wear sunscreen. I think I just got to leave it at that. But no, this has been great. Thank you for letting me verbalise my advice.
Yeah, no, thank you. We really appreciate it. It's been great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ash. See ya.